to use that data and to share it to reduce that opportunity, to reduce that empty running, which will therefore alleviate congestion, is one of the great challenges that this industry faces. How do we collectively and universally reduce empty running but remain competitive and collaborate at the same time, if you understand what I mean? It's a very competitive industry. Average margin less than 5% for most operators.
Welcome to Chain Reaction, the podcast for the supply chain and logistics industry. If you enjoy this conversation, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode.
Welcome back to the Chain Reaction podcast. I'm Michael, CEO of Flox Logistics Marketplace. This podcast is brought to you by Flox as a way to engage with logistics and supply chain professionals to explore ideas and people and challenges that are shaping the industry. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel. It will help us grow and reach more people that find these conversations valuable. Today, I'm joined by Richard Smith, Managing Director of Road Haulage Association, an organization representing interests of road transport operators across the UK. Richard works very, very closely with industry and government, helping shape policy, address sector challenges, and support the businesses that keep goods moving every day. Richard, welcome. Great to have you here.
Thank you very much, and it's nice to be here, Michael. Thank you very much for the time.
Richard, I like to start our conversations with kind of a little bit about your journey, a little bit about your background. So I've seen on your profile, you've pretty much most of your career has spent in logistics. But what I'm interested in is like, how did this journey begin? Was that by choice or by accident? And what led you eventually to your current role at RHA?
Thanks, Michael. It's an interesting question, and I will start to tell the story of myself. So I actually fell into the industry, as I described it, in a controlled way. So I left university. I was fortunate to go to university about 22, 23, having done some stuff before, traveling the world, etc., experiencing life as a young person at that time does. And I got a job working on a shop floor in a production unit. And then one day, a gentleman came across me around the warehouse saying, one of the people have phoned in sick. Would you mind loading a wagon outside? So I said, but I can't drive a forklift truck. This is back in the late 80s, early 90s, before health and safety was as rigidly enforced as it was now. And it was on private land. There's my exclaim. So I said, have a practice for half an hour and have a go. So I got on the forklift truck, tried to drive it like a car. I didn't realise what a dead man was, didn't realise that the real wheels pivoted and it turned around, etc., etc. As a young 23-year-old person would. And I was loading the flatbed. And it was an 18-ton flatbed, so it wasn't a particularly big one. And I had 16 pallets to put on it. 3.5 hours later, I finished. Now, the driver, who was on a night out, all these terms I didn't understand at the time. It was a lovely fella, and I still know him today, actually. He was just laughing, but he was giving me tips on how to drive the forklift truck, about squaring up and turning around, etc. And my punishment for taking 3.5 hours was to help him rope and sheet the vehicle, because it was a flat, so we had to put the covers on, the fly cover, the full cover, and roping and sheeting, which is an art that has died out in the industry now due to advances, and it's a great example of how the industry has moved so fast. And I think one thing, I'll just jump around a little bit, Michael. One people forget about logistics, and particularly road freight, is how it embraces technology, how it embraces change, and how actually fast it's changed in the last 30 years, which drives all sorts of challenges. But it's actually has. But going back to my first day, and I walked away from the forklift truck, and I said, I'm never doing that again. So I went back to my production line. Anyway, long story short, I ended up getting a license just for the people listening, and I did that for a couple of years, worked in a warehouse, and then I progressed and got a job working on a traffic desk. And I've moved at this point, so I was working for a company called TGG Williams at the time, which is now part of XPO through various mergers and acquisitions. And I got a job as a planner on a traffic desk, and then I moved into contract logistics, or on a warehouse, and I moved into predominantly a warehousing to start with. Then I went to work in Italy, and I've done various jobs for private and large, small scale logistics and transport businesses, run automated warehousing, etc., all the way through my career. And I'll really summarise this. Then I got to 2018. So at that point, I've been ops director, MD across European businesses of various shapes and scales, automated, fleets of 500 trucks, etc., etc. I was very blessed and fortunate to have experienced what I did, but I never had a career plan. And this is the great thing about logistics. And so I wanting a job that challenges me, that gives me options, that gives me diversity. And that's what this does. And this is one of the things which we will touch upon later on. People don't realise. I think one of the problems we have as an industry is if I said logistics to you, you would give me a very eloquent, definition. If I said it to somebody else, they'd give me a very eloquent, different definition. It's defining what logistics actually is. Yeah. But if I say to you road freight, everybody knows what that is. So I think we have the problem as an industry understanding what it is we're talking about. But entry into logistics, it's probably the most. It's the best career path that you can develop into a specific area. So we've got accountants, we've got marketeers, we've got engineers, we've got academics, you've got drivers, you've got warehouse operatives, all skills and professions in their own right. So it just gives you a wonderful opportunity. I am a great example of social mobility. Somebody that started off, literally, if you want to look at this, but driving a forklift truck, which is a profession and a skill. And I would do that. I would do that tomorrow if I had an opportunity. And I've made it into a position where I'm now the managing director of the largest dedicated trade association in the country that represents trucks, coaches and vans. And it's a privilege to sit in this position. So if you ask me how I got here, I worked hard, I enjoyed my job, and I was fortunate to work with some people that I learned from, and I got opportunities. Was it a plan? No. Am I glad that I stumbled into it? Yes. So does that answer your question, Michael? Or do you want a little bit more around?
No, it does. It does absolutely. I mean, it's a fascinating story, and you are among the majority of people that I've spoken with ever that got into logistics by accident. But it's fascinating. You mentioned it's exactly that. It's such a complex and multidimensional space, yet so few people choose it by design. So few people aspire to go into logistics. It kind of happens to them. Same story with me. I'm not going to tell that one, but it is very, very similar. I've never thought about logistics being such a fascinating field with such depth and complexity and breadth of issues that touches everything, and it is one of the most fundamental industries we have things moving. I mean, if you have a bread on your plate tomorrow, like, where does it come from? Well, logistics is definitely being involved, which kind of brings me to the next point that I want to discuss. Kind of overall, we are going through some challenging time these days, and I would love you to kind of maybe share your thoughts, because you're talking to the entire national kind of the set of businesses all over the country. What is your kind of macro sort of take on the current environment, specifically in logistics and road freight? Sort of, what are the biggest challenges you think? What are we facing? How the immediate future might look like?
Okay, so I'll talk. I mean, to be honest, it's a really good question, and it leads me to another part which I'll come back to. So, first of all, logistics is not recognised. It's an invisible industry. It just happens. You articulate the point very well, and I'll talk specifically around road freight and coaches and vans, and I'll branch up into logistics because we specifically cover road, truck, coaches and vans. So if you imagine logistics as the umbrella, we are the centre staff because 80% of what moves within the supply chain in the UK is on a truck at some point. Might be a big one, might be a small one, might be a little one, but it's on a truck. 98% of food will move on a truck or a van. 98% of pharmaceuticals, blah, 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 blah. So it is a critical, essential service to our everyday lives. From a coach perspective, and the reason why I'm talking about coaches is that the behaviour of a coach is exactly the same as a truck. It's not on a round and round robin schedule. It can go anywhere, it moves people. But the coaches take people around the country. They support local communities, school runs, for example, tourism. It's an industry in itself. It's not recognised as such. It just happens. So coming back to the challenges and the macro position, if you look at the country, if you went and spoke to a manufacturer, if you went and spoke to a retailer, we face the same challenges. It is about skills, the availability of skills and the skill set, and the future generations' expectations of what the workplace could be. Last year, we did a detailed piece of work with Women in Transport about the intergenerational planning, the 5 different generations in the workplace, how they interact, what their expectations are going forward. There's a resource challenge in this sector, just like there is in all other sectors around drivers, mechanics, engineers. We have automated warehouses. We have mechanics that need to supply trucks. It impacts the logistics and road freight sector just as strongly as it impacts any other sector that's more high profile and prominent in people's minds. So this invisible industry, not only is it skills, It's about net zero. It's about the environment. We've got to become greener. We've got to those challenges that come, around electric cars. What about electric trucks? What does that mean to this industry? That's a podcast on its own. So I won't go into that too much detail. Again, infrastructure, which we take for granted. We're complaining if a train doesn't run or if we get stuck in a bit of congestion on the road. The infrastructure keeps the country moving. We did a piece of work with the Oxford Economics group, and we estimate that every year £30 billion worth of cost is driven into the economy, because of congestion. That's not moving around. That manifests itself in manufacturers waiting for pallets of widgets to arrive, or builders waiting for bricks, or operators of trucks and supply chain providers having their vehicles and assets stuck on the road, and they can't double shift them, run them twice, and the efficiency of that vehicle, it becomes a cost rather than a profit. That's where the £30 billion comes from, and it really focuses your attention on that. Probably not specifically this industry, cost and regulation. So it's a heavily regulated industry, is road freight. So driving the truck is more regulated than flying the plane. Fact. Okay, it's a fact. It's breaking news. And so therefore, the regulation that sits around it requires a lot of focus and attention. One of the challenges that we do face as an industry is driving the truck in certain areas from Scotland all the way down to London. There are different regional, local challenges that you might face. For example, DVS standards in London, which is the correct thing to do. The cameras, the vision, interaction with pedestrians because it's a congested area. To access London, you have to have a vehicle that operates to a certain standard, for the listeners that don't know. But that's not uniformly applied. It's just London. So if you're going into Birmingham, you don't have to have it. So if you're an operator and you pretend to go to Birmingham and all of a sudden you have to go to London, you can't go because you'll get fined. It's that understanding and that rationale. And I think one of the big challenge we face from an engagement perspective with the four nations, because we engage with all four nations that make up the UK. It's not just England, it's Scotland, it's Wales, and it's Northern Ireland. There's another challenge that to consider on a macro scale. They're very different regions with different topography, with different ways of access, with different clusters and conurbations. So how you provide that service is slightly different when you face these challenges. And then probably, what people probably don't think we engage with is the movement of goods. So it's what we call the international pillar. So this is about the Windsor Framework. This is about, since we left the EU, how does that impact that truck coming in, which will predominantly on a foreign driver, to the UK. So we've got the SPS checks. It slows the process down. Every time a vehicle slows down, it costs money because it's not been as efficient as it can be. And the age-old one, since I joined the industry a long time ago, and a number was produced that said at any one time, 30% of the vehicles in this country are running around empty. So there's empty running, what we call empty running. We believe that's still to be the case. This is an industry that is driven on numbers and data, whichever way you look at it. When you're planning a vehicle, you've got a registration, you've got a destination. It's all about numbers and data. You've got load fill, you've got a time you're going to get there. It's quite a very simple, but it's a mathematical formula. You've got your standing costs, you've got your running costs, you've got your efficiency. It's to use that data and to share it to reduce that opportunity for it to reduce that empty running, which will therefore alleviate congestion, is one of the great challenges that this industry faces. How do we collectively and universally reduce empty running, but remain competitive and collaborate at the same time, if you understand what I mean? 'Cause it's a very competitive industry. Average margin less than 5% for most operators. I'll just describe the shape of the industry from a business perspective. So most people will look at road freight, I'll take that as an example, and you will recognise the main players in the market, the global logistics companies. Okay, and I won't name them because it's free advertising. But actually, 85% of the UK market is made up of hauliers that operate less than 15 trucks. Okay, so the majority of this industry are SMEs. In fact, they're not even SMEs, because that's the government's definition of an SME is 250 employees. These will probably be less than 40 people. So the micro businesses. Why is that important for us to consider as a country? Because they are the backbone of the economy. Because most of the recognised brands and logistic providers that you will see on the streets will use a percentage of them as part of their network. So typically, when I was operating for a few large household names in that space, 30% of my delivery network would be made up of subcontractors, which are the SMEs, less than 15 trucks, because they give me a flexibility. they give me a flexibility on my cost base, and they give me a flexibility on my demand, because this industry fluctuates with demand. If the sun shines, as it is doing today, as you can see from the back of my window, there will be a spike in deliveries, I would dare say, of barbecues, etc., etc., etc. We react to that. It's a very reactive industry as well. So it's very good. But going back to the make for the industry, the 85% of this industry will be what I describe as a lifestyle business. Okay, so the person running that business will be probably driving the truck for some of the time, doing the accounts, fixing the truck. So there is no opportunity to break the cycle and really to develop a strategic view. So they are very tactical in that respect. They are, by the same token, this industry is made up of very entrepreneurial, resilient, forward-looking individuals. And they're just as resilient, forward-looking entrepreneur running an SME as they are in the more globally recognised businesses. Does that answer your question, Michael? I've wandered off a little bit there.
You are listening to Chain Reaction. This podcast is brought to you by Phlox, the leading marketplace for the supply chain and logistics industry. Visit phlox.is to find out how you find the perfect supplier or make your services available to prospective buyers. Thanks for tuning in. Now back to the show.
Oh, it does. It does absolutely. It's you've covered a lot of important areas. A couple of elements that you've mentioned, I'd like to pick on, but that's a very good overview of all of the challenges and a lot of actually fascinating statistics that I didn't know about. Well, in what I saw, one of those numbers you mentioned, 30% is outsourced. I've seen in larger logistics organizations gets up to 60% of being outsourced to SMEs, and SMEs or micro small family run businesses, hauliers, that actually last time I checked with Dun and Bradstreet is about 80% of the market of the companies registered and of the workforce overall in that freight and logistics space. So this is indeed. But they accompany, and this is the two dimensions that I'd like to touch upon as well is, but they are the kind of bearing the brunt of the current of the current market environment and the situation. So we have the macroeconomic risk, we have massive cost pressures, we have quite a challenging trading conditions, and kind of the trading volumes for everybody is down. So that's quite a lot of challenges there. We have some global challenges that may some people speculate may result in fuel shortages, for example. That is something that they need to manage. And then on the other side is the technological advancements that needed to be kind of kept up with, because as you mentioned, logistics runs on data. The fact that you can drive a truck from point A to point B and load and offload it, well, that's kind of why you qualified for that job. But as a service to a customer, it's attached to a lot of data and insight with that. So how do you see both the cost pressures and the kind of the social and the commercial pressures are evolving, as well as where do you see the technology is going?
And that's a really good question, and ultimately, again, I'll just touch a little bit on my process. So, I for the first 20 years in my career, I would describe myself as an effective operator. Okay, I was an ops director. I delivered. I did well. I had the numbers. It was good. So I was a very effective operator, and I used to leave the strategic thinking to other people. Because that's what I wanted to do. And again, it goes back to my point about how you can grow in the industry. And I thought, I'm going to go and do an MBA. I don't know why. That's what I'm going to do. I do know why. Because I wanted to test the academic learning against what I was experiencing. Purely because I have a brother who is a pure academic, and he just writes books. That's what he does. And I thought, I'm going to have a go at this academic. So I did a 2-year MBA. It was an afternoon release one. Paid for it myself. Anyway, so it's another podcast in itself. And the long and short is, yes, the academic learning has got a relevance to the industry, a real strong relevance, because what I had experienced is in the books, very simply. So then I started to start thinking a lot more strategic, and it started to interest me, thinking, hang on a minute. So I do all this every day, and what's the longer term? What's the next 5, 10, 15 years look like? And then above my parapet that I was in, what else can we bring into the industry? And that's to answer your point. So if you go back to 2000, Amazon just sold books, by and large, yeah. The high street in the UK used to have a store in it called Woolworths, which was like a departmental store that sold everything. If you look at it today, you say the people that sold books deliver quite a lot of stuff to everybody's doors, from big distribution centres, and they've got a certain supply chain that supports that. I'll just look at the UK in a certain way, So big trucks go in, little ones come out, in very simplistic ways. All that is driven by, AI generated, technology, and it's fascinating. I mean, the guys, I was between jobs in 2017, 18, and that's 9 years ago, obviously, to record him. And even then, so I got a job driving a van just for a few months because I'm a sort of person that has to do things. And I had to experience doing deliveries. So I was working for a recognised delivery firm, and I was doing 80 drops a day. And I got something. And I went to visit a member last year who does a very similar thing. And the technology has moved so fast. When I was driving the van, I had my, sat nav and it was all going on as much. Now it recalculates, if you've got it recalculates your route, but it also recalculates if somebody's out and you can't drop the parcel off. So straight away it just takes away and it recalculates it. The way the technology has enabled us to change the industry, because the person that changes this industry is you, sat at home. That's what drives the change, because your demand as a consumer on the manufacturer. So coming back to the point, on the question that you asked me, I think you have to look at this from, and this is why I mentioned that this industry, although the perception is it's just a few global players that drive it, and you made the very valid point, the reality is it's not. It's very integrated, and it's made up of small, medium and large businesses. We have a very good holistic position as the RHA because we have all of those in membership. So we see that. So when we're lobbying and campaigning, when we're engaging with government, other stakeholders, with Europe, because we spend quite a lot of time working with the IRU, which is the global equivalent of the RHA, to understand what's going on, we can speak with a representative voice, because actually we're experiencing all those things. The industry is what I call an early adopter of technology, and the reason why, particularly around the AI, is it has to do because of the low margin. It has to keep moving at a pace that is being demanded of it by the consumer. Yeah. So if you look at the retail chain, the retail map and the high street, and you walk down the high street now, and the town that I live in, and there's nothing wrong with this, is typically made up of coffee shops, nail bars, hairdressers, and a few stores that you will remember. Everything else is consumed on the back of that truck or that van into the door or to small distribution centres. And ultimately the generations that are now coming in to this industry, running the 85%, which tend to be the small SMEs that support the larger operators, are coming in, which is why I reference back to the intergenerational report that we look at, is about understanding the expectation of the next two generations coming in. So people have a perception that this industry, certainly the road haulage industry, is about big trucks, leaky diesel tank, and somebody stood next to kicking a tyre. This is not that. This is you mentioned engineers, you mentioned if you get into a truck now, what is the biggest difference? I had a very senior politician sat in a truck, a former Prime Minister actually last year, one of our members, and he'd never sat in the truck, and I said to him, what's the one thing you notice is not there? And he's looking around, so there's no gear stick. So everybody assumes he's saying, but it's not. He says, how do you make it go forward? It's a guy, and it's that perception. Does that make sense? So it's actually, you've got a piece of kit there. If it's electric, it's 300 grand. If it's diesel, it's 150. That is the state of the art, because it's got to be so safe, going back to my point, because there's more regulation around it than just flying a plane. So you've in fact got a plane coming down the road here, so it's got to be regulated, controlled, so it will adopt technology. So I think if you look at how the industry changes and moves, it's driven by the consumer. That could be you as a domestic consumer or an industrial consumer, and it has to adapt the technology in order to achieve that. And the people that are working in it, going back to my point, that's why I've got engineers, that's why I've got strategists. So you have to be tactical and strategic. And one of the big challenges we've got is to get the key stakeholders and policymakers to recognise that. Because we're invisible and we always react and we always respond. They think it's a tactical industry. They don't realise the strategists that actually do work in this space and the thought that goes into it. And actually, if they embodied that, and as I've got an expression that I always use, it's a very basic expression. If they walked a mile in the industry's shoes, they would understand that and they could get so much more out of it. That's not a political statement, it's factual. But in the context in the UK of the four different devolved areas that make it up, because they are different. We have hauliers in Scotland that deliver into England. We have hauliers in England delivering to Scotland. It's really integrated. Yeah, but the two are very different areas that you're delivering into. With different infrastructures. But it's still the same supply chain. Does that make sense, Michael?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I want to zoom in and actually on the word integrated that you just mentioned. So we talked about technology, and it's obviously this is something that is very close to our heart, and this is what we do. And we talk about integration, we talk about collaboration. The one of the biggest challenges that I see, especially in technology adoption, um, it's not that there are no kind of, I wouldn't say there are no dictated standards, but there are no traditional or kind of settled ways of working. We have a lot of technologies. We have a variety of firms that offer a variety of things, and individual players, and we have hundreds and thousands of them, are making up their own minds of what and how they need to do things. So when the technology is great within the four walls of an individual business, but then none of those businesses are operating within the four walls. They have to talk to customers, they have to talk to suppliers, they have to talk to providers, they have to talk to, I don't know, maintenance people and so forth. So those technologies actually need to be talking to one another, which brings up the need for the integration layers and so forth. And this is a massive patchwork. So how do you see that evolving? Which kind of, it's the technology infrastructure, and then we'll maybe touch upon, or you can say a couple of words about the general infrastructure for the kind of the roads and facilities and everything. So those are the big challenges I see as well, kind of for the near future.
Okay, so I know you're absolutely right, and I'll approach this and tell me if this is not answering the question. So that's just triggered a thought process in my mind, which might not be relevant. So, and I'll speak from experience in my career. In my career, I've operated what you would see as some big blue chip contracts. Okay, I'm not going to mention this, big blue chip contracts, and the industry. And I used this recently when I was talking to somebody. Our biggest challenge is, how do you make such a competitive industry? And it has to be competitive. It's driven by competitive, passionate people. Yeah, but it's because it's so low margin that you have to be competitive. And I would shake hands and speak to you and have a lovely meal with you, but I would undercut you for a fiver if it meant I were going to win a business. This is that type of industry, and there's expressions like race to the bottom. It is. People will undercut and undercut and undercut. It's a really competitive. The biggest challenge of the industry, and I'm talking about the major operators all the way down to the SMEs, so I'm not picking on one group. How do you drive collaboration in such a competitive environment? That's the answer you've got. That's what you've got to start and work back from that. So, and I will make it up. You've got a corporate haulage business. You've got a corporate logistics business there, of which 80% of what they do is on a truck. But they're a logistics business. You've got warehousing. They've got everything. Yeah, and you've got another one over there. Okay, and they're both running around 30% empty. This industry does not naturally lead to them doing what you're suggesting, where they all get into the same room and they say, okay, let's share and spot. So you have things, old-fashioned word now, which is actually, this is a good example. So when I started operating as a planner, you used to sit there with a big piece of paper and write. You had your vehicle reg, and you had your 5 days of the week, and you had an AM, PM slot, and you used to write down where they were going, how many pallets, and you used to add up at the end of it how much revenue you were getting, and you had your calculator, and it'd tell you if you'd made money. That'd be 1992, that one. Now, and they used to have what they called groupage. Okay, so the pallets that wouldn't fit onto a truck, you'd have to get another truck and make it up and try and get it to run reasonably locally, and drop off 4 or 5 drops. So you'd have multi-drop, Now you have things called pallet networks, and this is about how evolution comes. So multi-drop on fleets has kind of disappeared. So the majority in pallet networks, which is one of the fastest growing parts of this industry in the last 20 years, has appeared. And there's 9 major pallet network providers now, which didn't particularly exist 20 years ago. But they are so, and if you go to a pallet hub, it's a good example. How you send the pallet from A to B, it's so technically enabled now, and it's adapted all the AI and the latest technology to move it and track it and trace it. That is a really good example. And I said this to I was at a conference recently, and it was a manufacturing conference, and they were going about how technically enabled it is. So you're going to have a look at a pallet hub. That'll be your supply chains that feed into your production site will just be as technically enabled as that production site. Robots moving about is great. Well, they have that. Amazon as well, don't they? That's a logistics provider. So it's come back to the point. The biggest barrier to that 30% is collaboration within the industry. It's not the technology. The technology is there and it exists. clearing houses. So this is been called a clearing house. A clearing house is somebody historically that doesn't own the truck. He just freight forwards. He provides. So you've got 10 loads to move. He will provide you with that. He takes a quid out of it. Off he goes. Provide a subcontractor to do it. That's all automated now. So you've got various platforms where you can just go in and away you go. Again, it's a great example. So the technology is there. There's got to be, the industry has got to want to collaborate more to allow the technology and the networks in, if that makes sense. Does that answer the question, Mike?
It does, and I'm great that you brought it up because this is exactly kind of it's very very close to our hearts, and that's precisely what Flux is and what we do. The barrier, I think, in collaboration is kind of the fact that the industry runs on a very very thin margins. Is on one hand, as you said, it actually drives excellence, it drives technology, it drives people on improvement side of things. On the other hand, it makes them also very risk averse and quite conservative, and they are very often quite reluctant to share information with each other, despite the fact that they will absolutely benefit from collaborating with one another. So how do you think that that particular kind of the resistance could be addressed?
Well, I think it's a difficult one. I mean, without moving countries and going working under a flag that's probably red, you might struggle with that from the political sense. But a little clue, and I'm not suggesting that. The reason why the RHA was invented 82 years ago was to return the industry from nationalised transport following the Second World War. Okay, so the war in 45, and to support the industry to go from being told what to do and centralised and offering that effect to being individual businesses. And I always think I go back to that and I reference it just from a point of contract. And I'm not suggesting nationalisation of this industry at all. Yeah, but I think that there's some platform somewhere in between that could do it. It's starting to evolve. The industry's changing. The makeup of the industry is changing. So. The one thing I learned, I mean, I did a degree in economics, and one of the things that always sticks in my mind is that economic forces always prevail. You can't beat the market. You cannot beat the market, and people have tried. We can do this another podcast, and they've failed, and you never will beat the market. So we're evolving and we're nudging along now. So if you look at the industry 4 years ago, okay, that's a good example. There were on average 220 businesses went into administration every year. Okay. Last 3 years, it's been over 450, over 500, sorry. So it's doubled in 3 years. There's a change. There's quite a lot of merger and acquisition going on as well, which I'll provide to, and, the providers. A lot of people are under the misconception that the SMEs are all disappearing. It's not SME specific. It's across the industry. The makeup is still the same because the industry will always need a small element to do that. Those bits and pieces that the larger providers can't provide and vice versa. It's all integrated. I think one of the biggest reasons why we will become more collaborative is the generations coming into the workplace. So there's different people running those businesses now with different outlooks, looking at different technology. The one thing that technology in my career, and I can say that gave me a vision. It allowed me to see things. It gave me transparency. So I used to sit there planning my fleet on a bit of paper back in '92, and I might, I'd do tomorrow's fleet and then go home thinking about this. I've done tomorrow. I can plan 2 weeks if you melt around now. I have 3 weeks. I can almost predict what I'm doing in 6 months. If I have that van, you didn't have that capability. So I think in the kingdom of the blind, now that we've got the eye, that vision going forward, if we become more strategic, will drive the collaboration because people see what good looks like. I think one of the key enablers to it as well, as daft it may sound, is the decarbonisation, the net zero part. As we change fuel supply to this industry, I think that will drive also and enable things to be done in a different way.
I think yeah, you're exactly right. I think it's a catalyst as well as both so it's the technological enablement of the visibility and then the actually unlocking the savings potential, because you've mentioned there's so much empty air being kind of driven around on the back of the trucks, but the all the decarbonization and the environmental improvements are the catalyst. They'll probably kind of tip it over, and people will start saying, well, actually it needs to be done, we need to do this. We are sort of getting to the there's definitely a lot to talk about. We can probably talk for hours. I think, yeah, the whole infrastructure and the electric vehicles. I've seen one of the posts. I think you've either commented or it was your post talking about the efficiency of the of an electric truck. that has to move 3.5 tons of batteries. So that brings on, that's definitely the whole new podcast about that. But one of the things I'd like to kind of conclude our conversation for today is I love asking everybody that kind of question. So you've highlighted a number of challenges, and it's a fascinating industry, but it faces quite a lot of challenges across multiple kind of areas and dimensions. But if you had a magic wand and you can just wave it and wish away a particular challenge or a problem that affects the industry today, what would it be?
And it's an easy one for me. This, and it's the one thing. I'll just give a little build up before I answer it. It's one thing that you might think it's a strange one, but ultimately, this is the reason why we are. This is the reason why we are all sat here doing what we're doing today. Not an exclusive reason, but the main one. I would, if I could wave a magic wand, I would want driving an HGV to be recognised as a profession, genuinely recognised as a profession, as a skill set, as something you can go into as a career, because that's actually what it is. You know, and ultimately, the reason why I would say that is because, not exclusive, but those are the people from a road freight sector that make it all happen. We haven't got autonomous vehicles. Things don't go on a magic carpet. Rail will not replace trucks due to the nature of what it is. The beauty about a truck and the person that drives it was a professional, because it's one of the most regulated industries you can provide. And that professional sitting there deals with congestion. He deals with grumpy customers. He deals with irates. Me and you try to get home from work in our car and we're a bit rushed. He's outward facing, he's inward facing. He's all of those things. And he's just recognised by Joe Public, and rightly so sometimes, as just being a nuisance, because that big thing he's driving is stopping him getting somewhere. So I would like us to really, next time we see a driver, please do say thank you, wave at him, because it is a professional, and these people have got a real desire and passion which is not seen, and the skill set to do their job. I couldn't do it. Could you drive a truck for a living and sit in all that congestion?
Yeah. Well, technically, I have a license for a truck, for not for articulated lorry, for a rigid, but I probably won't be able to do the job. No,
Correct.
not on
And
the job.
likewise, and that's about their attitude. And I just think, you are in a profession, I'm in a profession that's recognised as that. Driving that truck's a profession. So if you give me a magic wand, you're probably going to say infrastructure, you're probably going to say X, Y, and Z. All that stuff comes from that person driving that truck. So I'd like that to be
It
the wish.
it is very much about people. Yes, technology will catch up. The
Correct.
politician will wake up to some things, and the infrastructure will move along. But the people that actually can make the break, the industry, absolutely. And we're not paying enough attention to that. I 100% agree with you. So, Richard, thank you very much for joining the conversation today, for sharing your perspective, your insight. It's been a fascinating discussion. It was very interesting, and I hope that many of our listeners and viewers have stayed until now, and I'm very much thankful for you guys to staying with us, and I look forward to welcoming you again in the next episode of Chain Reaction Podcast. And thank you, Richard, for joining us. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Michael. Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Thanks for tuning in to Chain Reaction. We hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you have a story or insights to share from your sector, we'd love to hear from you. Simply reach out to us through the links in the description. See you next time.